This report is based on the documentary Nazi War Criminals Sentenced to Death and Their Requests for Clemency Verbatim by J.M. Meller and is available in bookstores.
The handwritten plea for clemency from Nazi war criminal Josef Kramer, who was sentenced to death by hanging in the first Bergen-Belsen trial in 1945, was long thought to be lost in the archives. Although excerpts from it are known and have found their way into the specialist literature, it has apparently not been documented in its entirety. After several years of research by our author, it has finally been unearthed in a London archive and is presented here in its entirety, perhaps for the first time.
Josef Kramer, born on November 10, 1906 and died on December 13, 1945 by hanging in Hamelin, was a trained electrician who, however, was unemployed most of the time and lived with his parents until 1934. In 1931, he joined the NSDAP, and the following year, he joined the SS. From 1934, he was employed there in the SS Relief Organization as a clerk and paymaster. From 1937 onwards, he served in various concentration camps, and in 1941, he passed training to become a protection camp leader and was then employed as a camp commandant in the Natzweiler-Struthof, Auschwitz-Birkenau, and Bergen-Belsen concentration camps. During his command, human experiments were carried out on prisoners in the Natzweiler-Struthof concentration camp. Under the direction of the Institute for Military Scientific Research, the most cruel Nazi crimes in the field of medical science research were committed. For example, poison gases and antidotes were tried on the prisoners, from which many then died in agony. In 1942, he was promoted to SS Hauptsturmführer. In August 1943, 86 Jewish women from the Auschwitz concentration camp were transferred to Natzweiler-Struthof and gassed in Kramer's presence, as he admitted to the prosecutor, Colonel Backhaus, in the trial on October 9th. Backhaus asked Kramer literally, "Did you actually drive these people into the room, the gas chamber, yourself?" Josef Kramer then replied, "Yes." The bodies were then sent to Strasbourg to complete the Strasbourg skull collection there. In May 1944, Kramer was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau as a commandant and was involved in the so-called Hungary action under Rudolf Höss, whose adjutant he had once been. There are numerous witness statements and affidavits about Kramer's brutality towards the prisoners. During the trial in Lüneburg, witnesses reported in detail about his mistreatment. In December 1944, he was transferred to the Bergen-Belsen hospital, to which numerous prisoner transports were sent shortly before the end of the war. Completely overcrowded, the prisoners suffered from starvation, cannibalism, and epidemics like typhus under his command. The camp was liberated on April 15th by the British 11th Armoured Division. On April 17th, Kramer was arrested. The international press quickly dubbed Kramer the Beast of Belsen in its reporting and referred to the convicts as the Belsen Gang.
His 5-page clemency petition was found in the private papers of his lawyer, Winwood. He was stationed in Germany in 1945 as a British soldier. In a report, Winwood describes how he became Kramer's lawyer. Winwood, who was a lawyer before the war, read a call in his barracks seeking lawyers to defend German war criminals. And Winwood did, in his own words, what no soldier should do. He volunteered. A total of 4 defendants were handed over to him for defense. In addition to Josef Kramer, there were Dr. Fritz Klein, Peter Weingartner, and George Kraft. The latter was the only one of the 4 clients who was acquitted. The remaining 3 were sentenced to death on November 17th. After the conviction, Kramer wrote his request for clemency to Field Marshal Montgomery, who Winwood translated into English for him and forwarded. His request, like that of the other convicted people, was probably never seen by Montgomery, which has already been discussed on this channel in another documentary. If you would like to know more about this, please take a look at the documentation about Irma Griese's missing plea for clemency.
After Josef Kramer's request for clemency was rejected, his lawyer met him again a few days before the execution, which took place in Hamelin on December 13th. He revealed to Winwood a secret about the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp that, according to current research, is apparently completely unknown to this day. Winwood noted this secret as a side note in a report, and it has been forgotten ever since. But before we discuss that, let's first come to Kramer's request for clemency.
To Mr. Field Marshal Montgomery, British Army of the Rhine. Dear Mr. Field Marshal, on November 17th, 1945, I was sentenced to death by the military court in Lüneburg. The reasons that led to this judgment were not disclosed to me. I would like to ask you, Field Marshal, to reconsider the verdict. I would like to prove my innocence by providing the following information. Bergen-Belsen prosecution. The Bergen-Belsen camp was in very poor condition when the English troops arrived on April 15th. It's not my fault that only physically weak and starving prisoners were found that day, and that the camp was so terribly overcrowded. I objected to this several times early on in Berlin-Oranienburg to my superior office and drew attention to the consequences of such behavior. Nevertheless, countless transports of sick and exhausted prisoners continued to arrive from the other camps. With the few resources available to me, I worked tirelessly to do everything I could to avert the worst. The fact that it was not possible to master the emergency was not due to any negligence on my part, but rather due to the consequences and major restrictions of the long war. Responsibility for the terrible conditions in Bergen-Belsen, with all the resulting consequences, lies solely with my former superiors, who were precisely informed about the conditions. As a soldier, I only had to follow orders. I did my duty self-sacrificingly, and without regard for myself, until the last day. I remained loyal and conscientious at my office until it was handed over to the English troops. I didn't flee cowardly and irresponsibly like everyone else, but I waited for the English troops at my camp. While the others were concerned about their personal safety, I was only concerned about the prisoners entrusted to my care. I never thought about myself for a second. I can say that with an honest and calm conscience. What depressed me most was that the conditions in Bergen-Belsen were so bad, but even more so that I could no longer help. Accusation of Auschwitz. I was there between the 10th and 15th, May 44 to the end of November 1944, as commandant in Auschwitz. At this time, the gas chambers had existed for many years. Even though these facilities were in my storage area, I had no authority over them. Orders about all transports and gas selections came only from the commandant of Auschwitz, one as the place commander. I did not agree with the gassing of the Jews, but it would have been completely pointless to object to it. It would have only put one's existence at risk without being able to change the slightest thing about the implementation of this extermination operation. I never took an active part in these selections either. When former prisoners say otherwise today, I can only attribute it to feelings of hatred. If I was found guilty despite the above, it was based on an error. I myself am not to blame for the killing of a single person, regardless of race or nationality, in the gas chambers of Auschwitz. This and nothing else is the pure truth. War crimes and international law. Even though I had nothing to do with the war, I am charged as a war criminal. My repeated voluntary reports for deployment at the front were not approved. As the English expert on war crimes and international law, Professor Schmidt from the University of London, explained to the court, the concentration camps existed for many years before the war and therefore cannot be viewed as war crimes. Furthermore, Colonel Schmidt has clearly demonstrated that in the event of differences between international law and national law, the laws of national law always prevail. This decision would be recorded in the law books of England, America, France, and Germany. The court's legal advisor, Judge Sterling, did not address these very important points at all. It would have been his duty to provide information about this, and I am convinced that the verdict would have been different because the court would have assumed completely different conditions. Dear Mr. Field Marshal, in summary, I would like to conclude my request. 1. I am completely innocent of the crimes I am accused of in Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. 2. I am not a war criminal. 3. I have not yet killed anyone on my own initiative. 4. I was just a soldier, and as such carried out the orders of my military superiors. Taking into account the above points, which represent nothing but the pure truth, I ask you, Mr. Field Marshal, to re-examine the judgment made. Josef Kramer.
As mentioned at the beginning, lawyer Winwood met with Kramer again in the Lüneburg prison a few days before the execution. There, Kramer told him about a secret meeting with Himmler in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp a few weeks before the camp was liberated. Kramer emphasized that there was no one but him who knew about it, and if Winwood hadn't noted it in his records, this information would probably be lost forever. Winwood wrote the following. I am reminded of something told to me by Josef Kramer, whom I had defended on charges arising out of his conduct at Auschwitz and Belsen a few days before his execution. He said that some weeks before Belsen was liberated by British troops, Himmler had paid a secret visit to the camp and had earmarked a site at the rear of the camp, near where the memorial wall now stands, for the erection of some buildings. Although gas chambers were not specifically mentioned by Himmler, Kramer was left in no doubt that they were the proposed buildings, as Himmler commented that it would be unfortunate, now that the war was lost, if those prisoners who had been moved to Belsen from the eastern camps in face of the advancing Russians were left to tell the tale. Kramer added that he had told no one of the visit, and as Himmler committed suicide on being captured, it may be that this is the first disclosure. It remains to be seen whether further research will reveal further results.